Hey everybody, welcome to Cooking with Vince. If you're new here, please like and subscribe to the channel. It'd be highly appreciated. Today we're going to be reacting to Joshua Weissman's lasagna video. Haven't seen this yet, so you're going to get my raw reaction, and I'm going to let you know what I think.
Here's a fun fact for you. In the song where Lil Wayne says, "Real G's move in silence like lasagna," he's referring to the fact that the G in lasagna is silent. When I first realized that, I was like, yeah, you know. Okay, maybe you already knew that, maybe that doesn't blow your mind, but hopefully this does.
Looks really good.
Okay, so really quick, just before we get started on everything, I have to stop us and just say a humongous thank you to all of you guys for the massive support on the last video that I uploaded about me leaving the restaurant that I was at. I honestly was not expecting a response like that. First off, we just hit 300,000 subscribers. Mind blown, honestly. It happened way faster than I expected. That is the most amount of views and positive response that I've gotten in any video in a 24-hour period ever. I'm just so grateful, just saying thank you. Aside from being cheesy, no pun intended, I'm not gonna describe what lasagna is. Hopefully you know what it is at this point. We're making our own noodles, we're grinding our own meat, we're doing it the right way, except for the fact that my noodles stuck to each other in the middle of filming this, so we had to halfway use other pre-made. Okay, we're not gonna talk about that. Let's just do this, shall we?
When you make lasagna, the first thing that you always make is the sauce. It takes the longest and you can do it up to 3 days ahead of time. Plus it tastes better after a day in the fridge. So in order to make that, you're gonna need 1 pound or 450 grams of ground beef and 1 pound or 450 grams of ground pork. Now I decided to do that myself because I just got this new grinder attachment. If you wanna know where I got it, the link will be in the description. It's actually surprisingly cheap.
Sometimes I also use ground veal as well. So ground veal is really great. What I do for my lasagna is a third ground veal, a third ground pork, a third 80-20 ground chuck, and he did a pound of each, 500 grams, 450 grams. You can do, if you're doing 2 pounds, you could do 1 1/3 pound of each. So that would equate to about a third of each. So you could do that as well.
Actually surprisingly cheap.
For grinding the beef, I just basically used a chuck roast cut up and just put that through the grinder. And then for the ground pork, I ended up using pork shoulder. More specifically, Boston butt, just sort of cut up and, ground. Now, if you do grind it fresh, just make sure to knead your meat for about a minute and... that does not sound good. Just make sure to knead it so that the fat's emulsified in there. That's it. Then heat a large, heavy bottom pot over medium-high heat with enough oil in it to coat the bottom of the pot. Now we want to get a nice browning on this, so to do that, you're going to take about half your meat mixture or so, and you're going to pat it into a large thin patty, and place it in that pot. Make sure the pot is super, super hot. Pro tip, whatever you do, do not season this with salt yet because the salt's going to draw out water and it's not going to get as good of a browning. And then just sear it for about 2 to 3 minutes on both sides. You should get a nice sort of browning. And you're going to repeat that until you used up all of the meat. Just make sure not to overcrowd the pan. Now, I actually almost forgot to add this to my pan, so I had to cook it separately and then add it later to the sauce. But in that same pan, you're going to cook off 4 ounces or 113 grams of guanciale or pancetta over medium heat just until it sort of releases its fat and fries in it, just like until it's nice and crispy and brown. Then once that's done frying, add to that pot 1 medium-sized onion finely diced, 1 finely diced celery rib, and 2 finely diced carrots. Give that a little stir and then just let that cook and saute over medium heat for about 2 minutes or until all the vegetables turn translucent and begin to soften. Then add 3 tablespoons or 60 grams of tomato paste, give that a stir, and then just cook that in the pot until it just begins to stick to the bottom. Then add 1 cup or 236 milliliters of white wine or just water.
So this is just personal preference, but usually what I do with my lasagna is I'll do the sofrito first, and then I'll actually cook the meat. And then once I cook the meat, then I'll usually add the tomato paste, fresh San Marzano tomatoes. And if you did decide to use wine, you would put the wine in with the meat before the tomatoes.
Or just water if you don't want to use wine. Give that a stir and let that simmer until it's reduced by about half, and then add 1.5 cups or 354 milliliters of chicken stock. I had some frozen chicken stock.
Oh, the chicken stock. Oh, no. I would not use chicken stock. Again, personal preference, especially if you're doing the authentic lasagna from Bologna. I personally would, if you want to impart that flavor, the traditional Bolognese ragu actually has chicken livers in it. So if you did like an ancient Bolognese ragu, you could do that. But I definitely would not do the chicken stock. Again, personal preference. I like to stick to the original recipes and make those alterations if need be. But that's just me.
So I had to improvise here. And then one 17.6 ounce or 500 gram container of crushed tomatoes. Add your meat along with its juices, then just let that simmer for about 1 to 2 hours or until it's nice and reduced and mostly meaty. You don't want it to be super runny, otherwise you're just gonna get a really liquidy lasagna. So you want something, you know, hearty and meaty. Also, towards the end of the simmer, I kind of like to use a vegetable masher just to crush everything up and get it super, super fine. That way it's just not too chunky, you know? It's nice and even. So that's it. That's your sauce. Now, like I said, you can make this stuff ahead. I actually like to make it a day ahead because it
does look good.
Rosemary in the fridge, but you know, you can also just use it right away. Okay, so this part is totally optional, but I made my own pasta because, you know, I'm extra. So you're gonna...
And sometimes what I'll do is towards the end of the cooking process with the ragu itself, and he's right, I would say for a lasagna, 2 hours is a sufficient amount of time. I put just 1 glass of milk. 1 glass of milk, it makes the sauce a little creamier. It's gonna boost your lasagna, I promise.
You're gonna start with 3 cups or 480 grams of all-purpose flour, and you're gonna add to that half a teaspoon or 3 grams of fine sea salt, whisk that together, and then sort of make a little well in that flour mixture and add 5 whole eggs. Start whisking that together with a fork, just slowly bringing in the flour on the sides and incorporating it very slowly, and then once it starts to come together, just begin kneading it. If it's too dry, you can also just add a little bit of cold water, about a tablespoon or so at a time, until it...
I do not add the water. What I do personally is I'll add a little bit of egg if I need be, if it's too dry. And then if it's too egg-like, I'll add a little bit more flour. That's gonna make the consistency how you want it for your sheets. I've known from personal experience, if I use 100 grams of flour to 1 egg, sometimes I'll usually need 1 more egg to try, or sometimes 2 to get it to the right consistency, but it's all about feeling. You know, if you have a pile of flour and you notice that the mixture isn't combining the right way, then you know to add an extra egg. But if it's a little too moist with the eggs, then you add a little bit of flour. So 1 egg to 100 grams of flour, and I'll add that extra egg or I'll add that extra flour depending on if it's too dry or if it's too moist.
Together. Then once you get a nice cohesive dough, knead that until it's relatively smooth. It doesn't have to be perfect, and then wrap it in plastic wrap and let it rest at room temperature for about an hour. Once the dough is rested, divide it into 4 equal pieces, then flatten each piece into a rough oval and run it through a pasta roller at the thickest setting, making sure to dust it with flour so it doesn't stick, which by the way, you can get this in the link in my description. Then just keep rolling that dough on a thinner and thinner setting, 1 notch at a time, until you either reach the thinnest setting or it's thin enough that you can see your hand through it, like when you...
Exactly. You want to see your fingers.
You might be thinking, well, why make my own noodles? But there's a huge advantage to making your own noodles, which is you can cut them to whatever dimension you need them to be, so they'll always fit the pan perfectly. And of course, quality control. But I will say that, don't stack your noodles like this, because let's just say that I kind of left them like this a little too long, and maybe they all stuck together, you know, and I ended up having to use pre-made noodles anyway, so don't do that. Okay, so if you're using noodles that need to be boiled or the fresh-made ones, you're gonna go ahead and get a pot of...
Sometimes what I'll also do, and this is what they'll actually do in Bologna, they'll actually use spinach-infused pasta sheets, and that just launches your lasagna to a whole other level. I actually did that in my lasagna recipe. So if you wanted to check out the video at the bottom, I'll put the link at the bottom of the screen where I make the fresh spinach sheets. But this is great that he's making the sheets by scratch, and that's gonna set your lasagna to that higher standard.
Boiling water and season it very generously with salt. Now for the fresh pasta, you're only gonna blanch them in that water for about 10 seconds, pull them out, and then immediately drain them and use them. They don't need to be cooked very long because they're fresh. Now for dry pasta, you just wanna cook it until it's very, very al dente. You want it to be underdone. But honestly, you can also just get away with using lasagna sheets that literally cook in the oven in your lasagna and not have to blanch them at all. Now for the lasagna assembly. So first grease a 9x13-inch baking pan with butter, or a casserole dish works well. Just make sure that it's rectangular. And then apply a very thin layer of your sauce on the bottom just to prevent your lasagna from sticking. Then a layer of pasta sheets. Now obviously I got only 2 survivors of my homemade pasta, so that made a good base. If it needs to be pre-cooked, make sure that you're pre-cooking it, or you can use those lasagna sheets that bake in the ovens. Then spread a thin layer of half a cup or 125 grams of whole milk ricotta, followed by some fresh
And this is somewhat more your preference. Now, the original Bolognese ragu, or the original lasagna from Bologna, believe it or not, doesn't use ricotta. However, ricotta has a strong tradition in southern Italy, and even more importantly, there was a huge migration of southern Italians to the United States. So this is actually how I remember eating lasagna growing up. It was always with ricotta. I actually like bechamel sauce as well. Bechamel is really a great addition to the lasagna as well, and probably more authentic, but ricotta is fantastic as well.
Basil leaves, and then a layer of prosciutto di Parma if you want to get
yes,
like me.
No, prosciutto is great.
I like it in there. Then another layer of your meat sauce, about the same amount as the ricotta. Spread that out nice and evenly and thin. Then grate an entire layer of Parmigiano Reggiano, and then optionally another layer of Fontina cheese, which I'm a fan of. And then lastly, a nice layer of some thinly sliced fresh mozzarella. Now this is the moment that I had to switch to pre-made noodles because
sometimes I'll also use provolone cheese, buffalo mozzarella. So it looks like that's some pretty good mozzarella cheese that he's using, which is great. So this is shaping up to be really good there, Joshua.
I just recently discovered the tragedy that happened to my fresh noodles. But anyway, you're gonna do another layer of pasta sheets, and then you're gonna repeat the same process as before. You're gonna do another layer of ricotta, then meat sauce, then basil leaves, then prosciutto, and then cheeses. Then just repeat that 2 to 3 more times, or until the pan is full and you've finished it with another and final layer of just sauce and a generous amount of cheese on the very top. Mind you, it will be filled to the brim. Then place the lasagna behemoth on a baking sheet and place it in an oven that was preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 165 degrees Celsius for about 1 hour. Or until,
So sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually cook the lasagna without the cheese with foil on top. That way the cheese doesn't stick to the foil. And then I'll have like the last, 5-10 minutes on like the broiler setting, and then put a layer of Pecorino Romano cheese on top, or Parmigiano Reggiano, and then you get that nice cheesy, crispy top on it.
The lasagna is nice and brown on top and bubbling slightly. Then, and I cannot stress this enough, let it rest for 20 to 25 minutes.
Exactly.
If you cut it while it's still hot, it's gonna be a sloppy mess, and you don't want that. Trust me, you don't want that. Once it's all done and rested, you know what to do. Just do what Garfield does and go ham on that hoe. But you wanna know what else Garfield does other than enjoy Lasagna? He watches B-roll.
Guys, and that is it. So lasagna, we made it, we did it. It's honestly really easy. Once you do it for the first time, it's surprisingly easy. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I'm starting to shoot in the proper frame rate. Well, actually I'm shooting at 30 frames a second, so I should be shooting at 24. I know people have been complaining about it. I know that the right answer is somewhere in the range of 24 frames per second. Not everyone's paying attention to that minutia, but I'm trying to make this as proper of a video viewing experience as possible. Plus my brother yelled at me about it, so I gotta do it now. Working for myself now is, I can't describe how it feels, honestly. I'm still sort of adapting to this feeling. And it feels amazing, only good things, but I'm having a hard time formulating into words because I'm literally still kind of figuring out how to set up my schedule properly, but this is because you guys have been supporting me. I don't know how much more to express how grateful I am for this. So anyway, I'm not trying to turn this into any more of a cheese fest than it already is. We've been making lasagna references, cheese puns. It's a good time to be making lasagna or lasagna or however you want to make it. But either way, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Oh, and also don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter and all that jazz. It's in the description below. Shameless, you're welcome.
Great job there, Joshua. Fantastic lasagna. I'll have to do the prosciutto di Parma like you did at some point. That looks amazing. The chicken stock, I would probably just stick to salt and pepper. Again, that's me. Personal preference. I'm more of a purist, I guess, how you want to call it. But you know, definitely a great video. I do encourage everybody to follow Joshua Weissman. He's got some fantastic recipes. And again, if you're new to this channel, please like and subscribe. It would be very much appreciated.